going to pass this bill, one way or the other, and I have prevailed upon my Senate colleagues to please get as close to the House product as possible.
Please, House Speaker Mike Johnson pleading with the Senate to keep its version of President Trump's mega bill as close as possible to what the House passed back in May. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Tuesday, July 1st. I'm Willie Geist. Great to be back with you. The Senate is nearly a full day now into a vote-a-rama, as it's called, on the Republican Party's massive policy legislation that President Trump calls the Big Beautiful Bill. Lawmakers began to speed up the process around 2 o'clock in the morning after Majority Leader John Thune announced a new share of amendments, telling lawmakers he was limiting votes to 10 minutes apiece. The bill will fail to pass if just 4 Republicans vote no. That's the margin. If the Senate does pass this bill by the skin of its teeth, its version then also does have to go back and pass the House as Congress tries to meet the White House deadline of July 4th, which is Friday. Late last night, several conservatives huddled with Speaker Thune as it became clear an amendment they were pushing to further reduce Medicaid spending did not have the votes to pass. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the Senate's bill would add more than $3 trillion to the national debt, while also cutting federal spending on Medicaid by more than $1 trillion. The legislation would result in nearly 12 million Americans losing insurance by the year 2034, all of that according to the CBO. Meanwhile, we heard lawmakers frustrated about the process for a number of reasons, including this one from Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania.
Oh my God, I just want to go home. I've already, I've missed our entire trip to the beach. My family's going to be back before we that. So, and again, I'm going to vote no. There's no drama. The votes are going to go. In fact, the only interesting votes are going to be on the margin, whether that's Collins or Johnson and those. But all the Democrats, we all know how that's going to go. And I don't think it's really helpful to put people here till when some ungodly hour.
Man just wants to get to the beach. Let's bring in managing editor at The Bulwark, Sam Stein, the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, and congressional reporter for The Hill, Michael Schnell. Good morning to you all. Ali, let me start with you. Back on the beat this morning and in style with this vote-a-rama, which the name is a lot more fun than the process itself,
Absolutely.
actually. So just for viewers waking up this morning, we're nearly 24 hours into this process. What is happening as we sit here right now, and how soon might they get to a point where the Senate is ready to vote in full on this thing?
Yeah, I've long said this. Vote-a-ramas sound extremely fun, but they are actually quite painful.
Yes.
And you're watching some of these senators show the pain. I mean, just a few hours ago, we saw Senator Chuck Grassley sitting in the well of the Senate, where the Senate pages usually sit, looking dejected. But at that point, they had been going since 9:45 in the morning yesterday, working now throughout the night. And look, this is both part of the process, but then also a stalling tactic for Senate leadership, who are still actively cobbling together the votes here. On the one hand, vote-a-ramas are meant to be lengthy. It's an amendment process. It's a chance for Democrats to jam Republicans on issues like shoring up food assistance programs that are being cut in this bill, shoring up Medicaid, rural hospitals. All of those are pieces that Democrats and even some Republicans have tried to force votes on to try to make tweaks and changes to this bill. Most of those have failed, but they will resurface in the form of campaign ads later in the 2026 cycle. But then there's the piece of this where they're just trying to buy themselves some time. Leader John Thune has had members shuttling in and out of his office, and many of those members are the ones that Senator Fetterman are saying are going to be interesting to watch here. I've got a list in front of me. You've got people like the usual names that we often talk about, Senators Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Both of them have said that they have problems with this bill. For Murkowski, it became even more difficult because the Senate parliamentarian ruled that one of the key pieces that was in this bill that could have helped her get to yes was actually not okay in this bill. It didn't meet the rules that the parliamentarian sees as being germane to this process. So that could make this a more difficult yes vote for Murkowski. But then you've also got the absolute no's, people like Rand Paul and Tom Tillis. Tom Tillis newly unshackled because he is saying that he's not going to run for re-election. Then, of course, there's Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who has been clear that he has concerns about the deficit pieces on this. And then you've got other people like Rick Scott of Florida, Mike Lee of Utah, who have other provisions that they are trying to see if they can get in to make this a more palatable yes vote for them. I do think that ultimately the politics of Trumpism are going to win out here, but it's a tough morning to wake up for Republicans here, Willie, as they're still trying to get the votes together, as they're nearing what could be one of the longest vote-a-ramas ever in the Senate.
Yeah, Michael Schnell, over the last decade or so, it's been a pretty safe bet to say Republicans in the end will side with Donald Trump and get to the vote that he wants them to get to. He's applying new pressure with social media posts overnight, sending out J.D. Vance posting, others as well, kind of really putting their foot on the gas on some of these Republicans. But as Ali said, you've got two hard no's in Senators Thom Tillis and Rand Paul. That leaves you not much wiggle room. They can get 3 and let Vice President Vance break the tie, but if they get to 4, they're done. So what's your sense of the whip count right now?
It seems, as Ali laid out, that you have Thom Tillis and Ron Johnson, who are absolute no's at this moment. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins seem to be leaning no with their concerns about Medicaid cuts. And then you have a host of fiscal Republicans, fiscal hawks, who it really seems unclear what way they will go. These are people like Rick Scott, Ron Johnson, and Mike Lee. Essentially, those 3 had held out support for the budget, for the procedural vote on over the weekend, saying they weren't going to support it. But what clinched their support was John Thune saying that he would back an amendment vote, he would hold an amendment vote and support an amendment vote to implement additional Medicaid cuts in the bill. And now it seemed that that was going to help those 3 fiscal hawks get on board in the end. Well, that amendment hasn't come up yet, and it seems as though it is doomed to fail. There are a number of Republicans who said they don't plan to support it. Someone like Josh Hawley, for example, has said that he is not in support of that amendment. So with those Medicaid changes, those additional beefed up Medicaid cuts not being implemented in the bill, it is unclear where those 3 fiscal hawks go. And so I think that really the more difficult part of this for John Thune right now is this is not a concentrated group of defectors. This is not a group of opponents that all have the same qualms. He's dealing with a number of different pressure points. So you put out a fire in one corner, it could create a fire in another corner. That's the difficult juggling act that Thune is dealing with right now, that quite frankly he's been dealing with nearly the past 24 hours.
So, Sam, what's your sense of the nose holding that may be going on by some Republicans who consider themselves conservatives over the course of their political career, voting for something that's going to add $3.3 trillion, according to the CBO, to the debt over the next 10 years? That's going to gut Medicaid. That's what Senator Collins is arguing for here. We've got to get this Medicaid money to rural hospitals in states like Maine, but in states across the country. It's how those hospitals exist. Is this a painful vote for many Republicans to take?
Well, first of all, are we just going to skip past the fact that Ali said vote-a-ramas sound cool? They do not sound cool. I know.
It sounds fun, I think she said. It does sound fun.
They don't sound fun.
It's like a carnival ride.
No, they don't sound fun, and she shouldn't get a pass for that. And secondly, I would like to talk a little bit about that. Good morning. I would like to talk a little bit about that Fetterman clip. Unbelievable. Get to the beach. I mean, come on. You have a job to do. Just do the job, man. To your question, this is like a really interesting process to a degree. It's also very scary, right? Like we're looking at 16 million people potentially losing their health care coverage, all things considered, a massive blow to the deficit and debt, all to finance a tax cut extension that skews primarily for the really, really rich. And to your question, yeah, there are some members who care ostensibly about deficit and debt who are uncomfortable with this. But what you're seeing is just the gravitational pull of Trumpism just wins out for a lot of these people. And so, I know we're talking about, well, can Ron Johnson and Mike Lee really get to this bill? And if they, will their amendment pass and can that determine the vote? And I think we sort of know the answer is that, they'll find a way to get to the bill, right? It's like Josh Hawley spent months saying, we can't cut Medicaid for people. We can't cut Medicaid for people. And then he's like, you know what? This bill will cut Medicaid for people, but I'll vote for it because I'm going to then work to stop it from cutting Medicaid for people. And it's like, well, how do you rationalize this stuff? So it really just comes down to, will Lisa Murkowski get bought off by a few carve-out provisions that allow Alaska to escape the worst consequences of this legislation? And that's literally what we're talking about. Can they prevent this legislation from harming one state enough that state's senator will say, you know what, I'll allow it to happen to 49 other states, but my state's fine, and therefore she votes for the bill? And that's kind of a messed up way to do legislation. Now, will it then pass the House? I don't know. Probably, because Trumpism prevails usually. But if you just step back and you look at the process by which they're putting this together, no one's seen the final text of this bill. We just got consideration of this bill. They're still putting together this bill. And the expectation is that they're just going to turn around and vote for it in like a matter of hours. It's really, really weird, odd, probably not the best way to write massive legislation like this.